Hey everyone, today I'm talking to Eric, who is a general partner and co-founder of Hustle Fund, and we'll be talking about how engineers who are working in a stable full-time job should think about the transition to startup life. Hustle Fund is a VC firm investing in the pre-seed and seed stage of different companies with 150 million in management. Eric has previously worked in a couple big tech companies like Intuit and Instagram, and also founded a couple companies. And in his role as GP at Hustle Fund, he sees more than 1,000 deals per month. So he's a really great person to talk to about pattern matching and figuring out what works and what doesn't work for people who are thinking about the transition to startup life. So Eric, thanks for being here.
Hey, Rahul, it's great to be here. It's awesome to be on your channel as well and to talk about some of these topics related to engineers and bigger companies who are thinking about making a switch into possibly being a startup founder and what that might mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a common question that I get. I've lived that life of like being in big tech at Pinterest and at Meta and now doing Taro. Let's start off right there, right? So there are so many engineers who have really great careers. They've been at a big tech company for a couple of years, maybe gotten promoted. I wonder, does that translate, this really great experience in a big tech company? How does that translate into being a successful founder?
This is a really interesting topic because I think if you were to talk to 100 different venture capitalists or even like 100 different founders with similar backgrounds to what you just described, you may get 100 different kinds of opinions on this too. So I'm just one voice here. My view is that there are both advantages as well as disadvantages from coming from, let's say, a FAANG company or a larger tech ecosystem as a builder and then trying to start and create your own thing. So some of the advantages is, when I was working at Meta as well, just like yourself, Rahul, we kind of almost overlapped together while we were there, surrounded by tons of smart people. I mean, like, it's really difficult to get into an environment like that to become an employee, and folks are really talented. So to find great co-founders or collaborators or even early employees for your next company, I think it's a great ecosystem to find that kind of stuff. There's also really good mental models that you learn at larger companies too. Just, Meta, for example, was a very scaled business, tens of thousands of people working there. So at some point when your company hits escape velocity, those are good mental models to possess to see what good looks like in terms of the organizations, departments that you have to create in order to enable the machine to flourish. The disadvantage, I think, is as follows, which is I think it is kind of a rude awakening when people who have been in these larger company ecosystems begin their companies, because it's totally different. You come from a place where Meta is feeding you 3 times a day. There's endless snacks. There's great top shelf liquor, all these offsites, and they do your laundry for you. And then suddenly you're in a garage. It's 59 degrees. No one's here with you to help you. There's no infrastructure, and starting from scratch and hustling your way to figure out product market fit is an entirely different kind of discipline. So I'm not convinced that just because you are, let's say, a VP of engineer at Meta or any FAANG company or any top tech company, that you would easily be able to transition into the garage to start something from scratch.
Yeah, well, I think there's one thing you're saying there, which I totally resonate with, is that, frankly, you're pretty pampered working in big tech. Like, I very dearly miss the free food at Meta. As soon as we have enough funding, enough money, Taro, we're going to kind of bring back the free food. But I mean, certainly there's that element to it and like the smart people that you talked about. But there's also another element too, which I'd love your commentary on, which is the distribution, right? Like if you're at Meta or Google or Airbnb, you literally put up a widget somewhere in the app and you can drive millions and millions of eyeballs to it. Whereas it's so much harder with a startup. Like, you're not just handed distribution and press coverage and traffic in the way that you might be at a big tech company.
Oh man, I really love this point that you're making, Rahul, too. So when you were an engineer and I was a product manager at Meta, we had this really long onboarding, like engineering boot camp and also data science boot camp. And one of the things that I learned during data science boot camp, it wasn't to turn us into like expert data scientists, but actually to understand how to use the tools to run experiments. I will never forget that they said that a small experiment, and this is the baseline smallest you can ever do on a Facebook product, is at least 10 million users. Right. And that kind of blew me away. It's just like 10 million users, and ideally in a remote country like New Zealand, all that kind of stuff. And what you're hitting the nail on the head, I think, in that question is, finding 10 million people when you're an upstart company, like, that's a dream. Finding even 100 people to give you feedback on your product is amazing in the early days. And there's no obvious ways that you can climb that hill to just acquire those users. So it's a different kind of ecosystem of privilege when you know that you have product market fit, a massive consumer base that you can do tons of experimentation on, maybe verticalized products, versus just like staring at the empty canvas of your computer monitor, trying to figure out, okay, today is day one. How am I going to find one person to care about my product?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it does require a much deeper level of scrappiness to get people to care about you. Like step zero is get people to care and talk to you, right? And that's actually a hard thing when you're starting out.
I kind of want to throw that question on you because you've actually been in this scenario. You had a great career, spent over 4 years at Meta, and then you made the foolish decision to leave that ecosystem and start Taro. So like, what was that day one, that week one, that month one for you? Was it scary? Did you feel imposter syndrome? Any of that kind of stuff?
I mean, I definitely felt a good amount of fear in that, okay, there's so much infrastructure around me in terms of just not only my engineering peers at Meta who are so smart, but also all the other functions. If I had a question about design, literally a world-class designer, PM, data scientist, I could like walk over to them and pick their brain, which is so valuable. So definitely a lot of fear there. I think I like to think of myself as having prepared and like thought about this question quite a bit. And so I think Justin Kahn made this like very famous tweet, which is like first time founders worry about product and second time founders worry about distribution. And so for me, I was like, okay, wait, I'm a first time founder, but I'm going to act like a second time founder. And so like, I was very deliberate about like, how can I build up a brand so that when I do launch something, I can very quickly get feedback on it. So I can become a voice in the field that I pick, which is like upskilling for engineers, and people can care at least a little bit, even when I start out. And so that's why I had this YouTube channel. I had been super active with like creating courses and content on LinkedIn, Twitter, all these platforms. And so I like to think that I was trying to like forecast ahead about the, like, trying to avoid the abyss of no one caring. But I mean, it's still super challenging.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to your credit, designing the distribution in tandem to the product was amazing. I mean, now that you have 100,000 followers plus on your YouTube, like that's a big advantage that I frequently do not find, I think, in some of these pre-seed companies that we evaluate even at Hustle Fund, that we even support. That's
totally true. I mean, I do think that's been a huge part of why we've seen the success that we have seen with Taro. And I think that's going to continue to play a really pivotal role. So one other question I had on this topic was, I wonder how you think about like the number of years that you spent at big tech company and what that might indicate. And in particular, do you think there's a negative signal potentially from being at a place for too long a time period? Like, let's say you've been at Google for like 10 or 12 years. Do you somehow perceive that candidate or that potential founder differently from someone who's been at Google for, 3 or 4 years? How do you think about time?
A couple of years ago, I met a SaaS founder, an older SaaS founder. This guy at this time had been in his 50s, but he had a remarkable first few years in his very first company that he ran. And previously, he had been running SaaS sales for a really, really prominent enterprise SaaS company. And, when I asked him, like, what was the secret to your success? Like, how did you grow so quick? Like, you're kind of like the overnight sensation right now. And he said, like, yes, I am an overnight sensation. It just took me 20 years of learning how to run SaaS sales and develop products for me to get to this point, right? So, I think every journey is different. And when it comes to things like signaling, I don't really perceive, at least personally, that it's a negative signal if you've spent your career, even decades, maybe at a larger organization. Just sometimes it takes a while to create the right kind of personal environment for yourself and safety nets. And there's kids that need feeding and schooling and all that stuff too, before you can arrive to the right kind of timing for developing your business. But that said too, I think there's sort of two ideas that sort of come to mind as I think about this response. The first is, I do worry if you stay too long in this environment that you get too comfortable. So for example, I have a friend, he's like an E6 engineer at Meta, earning 600,000 a year, right? Yeah. So like the idea of just going right into a startup where you get nothing from for maybe even like 1, 2, possibly even 3 years, or very, very minimal salary is scary, especially because of the fact that he has 3 kids. Right. So that's one part. But part two is this, which is just like, there are always opportunities alongside of building your career at a big company where you can eat your cake as well, or have your cake and eat it too, or I guess, which is, side hustles or advising, or just having your footprint in the startup ecosystem by, I guess, lending out your skills for advisor shares. There's a lot of different kinds of permutations of this where, you can kind of do both in tandem before you're ready to maybe go out on your own.
Last thing on this topic is around, I wonder, based on all the, founders that you've worked with and you've seen, are there particular failure modes of these very tenured FAANG engineers coming out and doing a startup? Like maybe they wait too long to launch, or they spend too long on engineering because they have that like big tech engineering mindset. I'm curious, like, what do you think are the biggest failure modes that people should watch out for if they are going from big tech to founder life?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think my answer will be being too narrow in your swim lane. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say that I'm like an engineer at Meta. I'm picking on Meta a lot because that was my last real big job. And, I learned the discipline of being an insane engineer, right? Like I just know how to ship really well. I know all the right kinds of ecosystems to develop and all that. But I also missed out on developing relationships with marketers, lawyers, customer success, sales. When you jump into your garage on day one to start your company, it's actually relatively little engineering that you're going to be doing. I mean, that's going to be a part of your job if that's your core skill set, but you got to like pick up the phone, call people. Sometimes you have to like walk on the streets, like physically knock on doors to say like, hey, small business owner, you want to try using my tool? And it's really difficult to do that unless you've developed some good mental models by getting mentored or at least having relationships with people who do this all the time. So if you think that you're in a position, this is actually my plea to those who are in larger environments who are trying to think about doing their own thing. Maybe one way to spend the remaining time that you have at your company is to do a lot of networking, like a little bit of coffees or lunches, and ask like, I'm trying to understand what good looks like when it comes to customer success. Can you like tell me what you do in your job and like explain to me like how you arrived to your journey and so forth. And people love to talk about themselves and like what they've learned. And Silicon Valley, we're very much a pay it forward kind of culture where it's very easy to grab coffee and share advice. We love doing that kind of stuff here.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like the act of talking to people is something that sometimes can come unnaturally or doesn't come natural to like an engineer. And yeah, you're totally right. Like so much of the first few months of a startup is like user interviews, sales, figuring out what people want. And you have to be okay being uncomfortable, calling them up, sending them a bunch of cold emails, literally knocking on people's doors. I think that's a huge thing that people, they don't practice. They don't have that muscle as much as they should when they're doing founder life. Mm-hmm. Well, Eric, this has been super fun. I know that Hustle Fund, you guys recently started a YouTube series, which I love to see, and just more content creation in general, called Uncapped Notes. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So we just a couple months ago launched this series, Uncapped Notes, which is designed for first-time founders, those who are brand new to startups in this ecosystem. Our view is that like every day there's a new founder who shows up who doesn't know anything about startup terms or VC terms. Some of these things are really insider and kind of hard to decipher. So what we've done is we tried to create these really short 5 to 10 minute videos to atomize all this information on things like what does a good investor blurb look like? What does a good investor newsletter look like? How do you actually run an effective elevator pitch? Things like that. So you can check it out at youtube.com/hustlefund, and you can see the Uncapped Notes series there. And I hope that folks who can benefit, I guess, from that library of knowledge that we're creating over there in that channel.